Thanks, Marianne. Appreciate it. I'll pull this off here. Can everybody hear me okay? So I'm your first one today, huh? I'll try to get it kicked off with some excitement about cybersecurity in our state. It's always a fun, sometimes bleak, depressing topic to talk about, but I'll try to make it exciting for you, though. I was trying to think about that. I apologize. I have a lot of content here, and I'm not going to try to dwell on it a whole lot. And I think, do I have an hour with questions and stuff? Okay. So I'll try to go through it and not belabor on it too much. But I was trying to figure out what I wanted to cover. So I kind of approached it two ways. I was going to start off with talking about kind of what we're doing from internal executive branch. So for those that don't really know how the state of Indiana is structured when it comes to IT, we are truly a consolidated IT state, and I say that proudly and almost braggingly, because there are still probably more than half the states that are still in some sort of a project to get IT consolidated. And we did that back in 2005. It consolidated the entire executive branch, all under, down from 8 data centers to just one, with a recovery down in Bloomington. 13 emails, 13 different domains, all consolidated into a single forest and single email system. And so my office has the charge then to protect all that infrastructure, and kind of that dividing line between my agency and the other state agencies is the application piece and the applications that apply specifically to their line of business. So that's kind of how we're set up. So internally, that's what I'm responsible for securing. So I'll talk briefly about what we're doing on that angle, and then I'll talk about what we're doing sort of external for the entire state, because we did ramp up some efforts around that beginning of the year and getting some very good success on what's going on there. And so this is a kind of a top 5 survey that an organization I'm involved with, which is the National Association of State CIOs, conducts along with Deloitte. And this was the response from all the states across in our country here on the top 5 initiatives starting back in 2016. And they ring true with what we're doing here in Indiana. And I have just some points on kind of what we're doing in each one of those areas. So the training and awareness really is kind of where it starts. If you listen to most people talk about security, you can put all the gates and fences and protections around all that, but the simple fact is all of our users still have a key, and they give it away to people every day. And so it really starts with, if we can secure them, it's going to make our jobs a lot easier, or if we can make them just a bit more savvy about how they go about their work. And I think traditionally, when it was topic of, hey, we need to train on security, we need to do awareness, people wanted to treat it like your once a year onboarding, where you do your harassment training and you do your ethics trainings, and that's once a year, and you kind of check that box. And with security and the training around that, we found that that's really not effective, because they'll look at it beginning of the year and to get busy, things go by, and it's just not top of mind anymore. And so what we did starting last year for this topic is we do monthly trainings now for all 28,000 employees, and it's not cumbersome. So that was kind of the balance, because you can go overboard with training, you can get people numb to it, or you can turn them off altogether. But what we did is take a kind of a quick approach. So we're talking no more than 10 minutes. It's kind of a gamification, cartoony type stuff, where it's saying, hey, what looks great, what looks weird about this email? Can you find the misspellings? Can you find a URL that doesn't look right, that doesn't match the signatures? And it kind of walks them through some things. And then on the off months, we do just a simple video type, quick vignette on maybe whatever the current threat of the month is going on. So for instance, in April, we'll be doing all the tax-related fraud emails that come out and kind of get them acclimated on that and know what to look for. And then around Christmas time, we'll do, the infamous, you have a package, click here to check on it, even though you didn't order anything, they still want to go see what they got for some reason. And so we'll go all through those just so that it's kind of a top of mind and they don't forget about it. And we did Security Mentor last year. This year we're trying an outfit called Media Pro on that. And then on the monitoring piece, we have several layers on that. Our first layer is kind of what I'll call kind of our tier one, which is at the Purdue's Research Park in Lafayette. And we have probably, I think, 4 or 5 staff there. But that staff is supplemented by students that are in the Pathmaker program at Purdue. And it was kind of a joint effort we launched with Purdue as well as Intel. Intel has some pretty prestigious alumni from that university, and they wanted to help, and it was more to kind of help get this cyber notion and experience to start being proliferated through Indiana and getting students acclimated to it. And so we thought we could help by putting our first response SOC there and give those students just some real life experience, walking through the day of what's it look like to look at a network as big as the state of Indiana's. And we let them see just some low level stuff. So they handle things like blocking bad websites as they get on the block list. They do things like send our re-image tickets if someone took a laptop home and let their kid play on it and then it's got spyware on it and they bring it back in the office. Those will get flagged and they'll kind of get re-image tickets out to those. So they do some low-level stuff, but it gets them experience with the tool set and the systems that SOCs use, and it helps take a lot of work off of my senior engineers. So my senior guys aren't spending time doing just the day-to-day kind of maintenance. And then that second layer is our senior team, which sits down in central office downtown, and they do their own monitoring. They run their own SIM devices and their own alerting to look for the things that will really cause us issue and heartache. And they partner really closely with our Indiana Intelligence Infusion Center as well as MSISAC and some other folks to make sure all of the current threats are documented in our system, and making sure we're looking for those things as much as we can, as well as trying to get proactive as much as you can. That's a never-ending battle. And then that third layer is something we added as more of a way to help me sleep a little bit better. I still don't sleep well at all, but to sleep a little better, just to have another set of eyes above my SOC and my senior folks, and folks that kind of watch it and follow the sun the 24/7. And so we've partnered with FireEye and Mandiant on that piece. And so how do we handle the agencies? This has been something that I've kind of worked with our governor's office and our Office of OMB to allow our agency to take a stronger stance on help and guide agencies on what they need to be doing. And this basically all comes down to risk. I found it's very tough to talk to an agency head or a business leader about, hey, you got to do this cybersecurity stuff, because it's not very tangible for them. They don't understand what it means. They think it's strictly a technical IT problem. And so what my Chief Information Security Officer has done over the past year has been absolutely incredible on putting together a program that makes sense to the business and to the agencies. And it's a step-by-step process that we're going to require them to do, and we're going to score them on it. And we've taken a page from the federal government. I don't, if you saw, I think it was 2 years ago, federal OMB actually set a mandate that all agencies in the federal side will submit risk reports every year along with a plan on how they're going to address those risks. And so we're we're requiring the same thing, and we're actually helping to facilitate agencies to go through that. And so this maturity assessment, it was created by our Chief Security Officer. It's based off of NIST, and it helps them walk through their business processes, their business applications, and it kind of ranks them on a maturity scale on where they are in terms of good business practices that limit and minimize risk in their environment. Out of that maturity assessment, a set of kind of next steps comes out for them to help to create a security plan. And we work with them on prioritizing the items on that security plan, and we make sure that they have budget. That's why we work with OMB, and resources kind of tagged to go after those things, and then we watch it to make sure they're moving that way. And that was hence with the scoring. The third requirement is a risk assessment, and this is a third-party risk assessment, so it could be a pen test on their major line of business app. It could be a walkthrough on how the users interact with systems, risky behaviors they may have as they work outside of the state, and that's a requirement that'll go into their security plan as well. We obviously grade them on the training, so we don't put the training out each month and just hope they take it. If they're not at 90%, then we mark them red on a sheet I'll show you later that I call my shame list. And we make sure they communicate with folks on the importance of this training, and we drive them to get that. And then the last piece we measure them on is the vulnerability score. And since we don't have, as I mentioned before, since we don't have direct interaction and visibility to their custom applications, so they do their own development, they do their own projects, working with the third-party vendors, our recourse to make sure they're doing properly is our scanning of their systems and their applications and tracking any vulnerabilities we may see, and then helping them to get those remediated. So that goes into their score as well. This is just an example of some of the dashboards we've created for the agency heads to look at, and for our governor's office and OMB to look at on kind of how we're doing and how we're laid out from the scoring system we put in. And then this is that shame list. This is obviously just fake data. It's just to show an example. I didn't want to hang anyone out to dry in this setting, so we made up some data there. But that's a sample of what it would look like, and that gives a quick snapshot of who's taking this seriously and who needs to maybe be perhaps a bit more educated and talk to about the importance of these tactics and things we need to do. And so we don't just throw kind of this plan out there, because I found that doesn't work either. As you can imagine, we have agencies of all different levels and experience when it comes to security. Some of your larger ones you would expect, our revenue department, our health and human services have fully staffed security teams. But, if you go over to the Arts Commission, you'd think, why would Arts Commission need security? Well, they take donations, they have foundations, and so they have sensitive information, whether it's bank accounts or other things on people that are making donations, but they don't necessarily have a security team. So we've taken this extra step to not only present this scoring plan, but we're meeting with their key stakeholders and helping them to walk through these things. And so our goal is to touch each and one of those and make sure they understand what we expect. And if they don't, make sure they can get there and offer them resources, whether it's through our offices or if we need to partner them with some local firms to help them go through whatever it takes to get it done. Another interesting thing when it comes to collaboration, and I'll get more into this later when I talk about the external facing, but our office, along with Homeland Security, has been partnering a lot with the Indiana National Guard lately. I've seen some examples in other states where the National Guard can actually supplement these third-party risk assessments for the states at a much lower cost than the private sector. Obviously, it's just intended for government, but those are some things we're trying to work out now to see if we do set a cadence for agencies to do that risk assessment each year, can our National Guard just help us do that? And so that'll be a great savings for the agencies and make it a little easier for them to budget each year. And this is just a snapshot of the weighting, just the details behind how we create that score, and make sure that we really focus on that maturity profile assessment and the vulnerability scores, and making sure that that really is reflected properly in that score, and we're holding them accountable. So in the governance piece, another good thing our state CISO has done is he stood up a risk register, or it's a true governance risk and assessment platform. It's Archer's GRC platform. And this is a formal, so everything that I just described there is tracked in this governance risk and compliance system. And it's formal in the fact that there's workflows set up even at the agency head level. So where this is important is when we get into a situation in which we think we need to enforce some sort of a standard in terms of security, and either A, it'll impact the business detrimentally, they won't be able to function, and we have some of that with legacy applications, or perhaps they feel it's more of an inconvenience than it is a protection. Well, then now we have a system to formally document that, which will require agency head sign off. And there's also a review period on that each year, so that needs to be reviewed at a minimum yearly to make sure we can keep pushing things up the hill, and we just don't let things lie dormant and forget about them. So that's a huge piece that other states are trying to get to as well, just that formal document. And that also creates that dashboard where all those roll up for someone like your governor or your business CEO to look at and assess just all the risk across your entire landscape and kind of where we're at and what plans are in place to go after that. So that's the tool we're using for that. And then obviously the biggest part of our governance at the state is the state CISO. And then the operationalizing the cybersecurity piece. So we've taken several advances in this in this area, in the fact that now that the introduction of SaaS and IaaS and PaaS is on the horizon, and states are starting to be more comfortable with that, and the technology is maturing and becoming, the security is almost better than what you can do on your own now. We've set up several boards to evaluate these, I'll say smaller SaaS and PaaS solutions that come in, just evaluate them from what they're going to do with them, make sure it's documented, make sure it's the right solution, and make sure it meets our security requirements. For the larger ones now, on the if there's an RFP that's going out for larger systems, either one of our security architects or our CISO will sit on that approval committee for that RFP. But then we've also added what we want to see from a security and a cloud security aspect to our boilerplates for the state, so that as vendors and partners bid on these projects, they know up front kind of what we're looking from the security. So that's kind of how we've baked it in, all new development work and applications and systems that the state's bringing in. And then from an operational standpoint, for how we do our work daily, specifically in my office, a major change we've made this year is even the teams that are not in security now have security-based KPIs. So in the past, if you think of someone that runs infrastructure, say the server teams, their KPIs are based on uptime, they're based on response and performance, and time to deliver on the builds. Well, now they have new KPIs based on, for instance, 90% of your servers must be patched within 1 week of updates coming out, and it needs to be at 100% within the next 2 weeks. So those are things that are driving them to think about how they do their job every day now, and it's holding them accountable to make sure that they're taking it seriously, and they're not just relying on the security team itself, who has some visibility and some power, but it's not as effective as the folks that know what's on those systems and that do it every day. And so across the board, at least in my office, whether it's database, network, or whatnot, everyone's received security-based KPIs, so this is just baked in to everyday thinking. So that was the internal piece for what we're doing. So now I'll talk a bit on some things we're doing to help with kind of outward facing as much as we can. We don't have a lot of ability and leeway here, but we're doing what we can. And so one of the first things we started doing when we look at tooling and tool sets for the state is making sure we keep, my soft spot is for the local governments, and so I'm always thinking about them. If I bring in a tool and I think it can benefit them, I want to make sure that I can get the best pricing and I can dig through all of the contract rigmarole and all the red tape and make sure that it's available if they want to use it. We're not mandating anything or requiring anything, but it's there for the taking if it makes sense for a local government or a county. And so that's going into each new system or tool that we procure. And then secondly, what we're doing to make sure we're providing good guidance and good value for those tools that we make available, we require, especially in the security realm, because you can spin your wheels a lot on bringing in these tools that folks tout as being the best of breed, and it can do everything from start to finish, but they're complex. And so we require more of a proof of value where before we purchase these tools, we have to see it in action and actually doing the things we want it to do in our environment. And that way we know that it can be done, for one, and we feel a little more comfortable than making that recommendation for other government entities. So this is our cybersecurity website, www.in.gov/cybersecurity. It's going to go through a revamp here very soon, but this is an outward-facing piece that we put together. It's a collaboration between state police, Homeland Security, Fusion Center, IoT office, and then our SOC at Purdue, which our SOC has two names. It's our Operations Center, but it's also what we're calling our Indiana Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And so all those entities kind of roll up here and just produce content for just the general public. Resources for parents and kids, just things to get folks saying what's really going on out there and what should I be worried about, what should I be looking for, what should I worry about my kids getting into, what can they fall victim to, and that's updated quite frequently as new things come out and things that we think the public should be aware of. And two things on this website I want to talk about that are really outward facing is our Sharing and Analysis Center, and then that top one there, which is our Executive Council on Cybersecurity. And so the Sharing and Analysis Center, which is co-located with the Operations Center at Purdue, is indeed kind of that outward facing for public and for local government. Schools have used it before, but it's just a place to call with any random question on security. That team looks at all of the alerts that comes from the MSISAC and any of the alerts that are destined for K through 12 schools or other local governments. They'll actually give those folks a ring and just say, hey, just want to make sure you saw this. It may be something bad, it may not, but you probably want to take a look at it. And they form relationships kind of across the state so that it gives them someone they know they can call just with a simple question or guidance to get something they need for security. And it's a great place for them to share things that they're seeing, which we'll update it on that site as well and get information pushed out to other folks so that everyone's in the loop on what's going on. Because we all know most of these things that they start one place, it's a lot of copycats, and it'll just start going. They'll try it everywhere that they can. And so the quicker you can get that information out, you have a better chance of someone else being saved from it and not being a victim by it. And then the bigger piece that I'm really excited about is our Executive Council on Cybersecurity. This council was started under Governor Pence And I think we had 3 meetings maybe before he took off for DC. And then we rebooted it under Governor Holcomb. He extended it, and we kind of put a new focus on it. It is chaired by our Homeland Security Director, and with co-chairs of myself, our Major General Carr from the National Guard, and the Superintendent of State Police, Doug Carter. And we have actually assigned someone dedicated to running this council this time. I think the mistake we made the first time was we kind of left it all up to us, the 4 of us, to figure out who wants to do what on this. And since we all have other day jobs as well, this is strictly kind of a volunteer effort. The movement just wasn't there. So there's a dedicated person. Her name's Shatrice Mosley, who came over from our Utility Regulatory Commission. And her sole focus is to drive this council and establish the deliverables and the objectives that we wanted to get out of it. And she's doing a super job. And so I'll let you read the mission there, but basically what that boils down to is government just wants to be a facilitator. It's a fine line, especially when you want public-private involvement and you want to talk to local governments. It's a fine line when government, if there's a perception we're coming in and trying to say, here's what you have to do, and that's not at all what we're trying to do. We want to be the facilitator, and so we're basically trying to get folks to talk to one another across the sectors. So whether it's energy, whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, whether it's education, we just want to bring them together in a safe setting. And let's talk about the barriers. What's preventing you from doing what you need to do in security? What's preventing you from talking to your perceived peers in that same area? And let's see how we can help to remove those barriers and make that easier. So that's basically the mission. But the governor did put several objectives that he would like to see out of it too. And these are kind of what we've tasked with those various sectors. And these are specific for each sector, and so we know that there's the professionals and the experts lie within those, and so we've given them these directives and say, create this for your space, and let's get this documented so this thing can have a life of its own and continue on after this. And so the governance structure and direction per sector is a requirement, and formalize the partnerships from public and private. And let's get those documented. If we have to talk about, memorandums of understandings, if you have to talk about confidentiality agreements, let's get those on the table and see how we can get these things in place. Best practices for technology infrastructure, and this is really sector specific. And as you can imagine, if you look at, let's take the energy sector. The veterans of the world are going to be pretty mature in this area and pretty sophisticated. And if you go to a rural county, there may be an REMC out there that is, just literally keeping the lights on. So that there's sharing that can occur there. Veteran can share some best practices overall for that sector and help the lower level folks kind of take some best practices and build their capabilities and their resiliency up. And that's the goal here, is to get those two talking where they may not in the past, and let's share together. Build robust statewide cyber incident response. So this is more at the macro level with DHS, National Guard, State Police, to talk about how can we get together and talk now before something may happen. And I don't want to sound like doomsday. It's it's one of those things. It's kind of like almost like insurance, where you do these things in hopes that it doesn't happen, but you gotta kind of plan based off what we've seen in other countries already. You kind of got to plan for something that we haven't seen before. And so how do you get those right folks talking together beforehand so you don't show up after something and trying to figure out who's doing what and who's taking point? And so that group's getting together to form those relationships, get those roles assigned, and so that things are clear and we're not stepping on toes. And then also the other piece of that is what do we do, what can we do to work together and try to get proactive on some of these things? Are there exercises we can do, tabletops we can do, just to prepare and kind of walk through some of these things? Processes, technology, and facilities for cybersecurity statewide. So we're looking at particular assets that we have here in the state. For instance, if no one here has ever heard of the Muscatatuck Urban Training Center, I would highly recommend trying to find someone that can get you a visit down there. It's a very large piece of land. I can't remember the number of acres, but it's in the thousands, that the National Guard owns. They use it for tactical combat training right now, with, there's blown up buildings, blown up cars. It's a really cool place. It's like something straight out of a movie. But they also have a sort of a small city down there that with working stoplights, railroad ties. They actually have a working subway. That's a pretty small footprint, but it is an actual working subway that you can practice against. They have buildings underwater, and they have smart connected buildings. So we have an area that, and I neglected to mention, there's actually a steam-powered plant and a waterworks facility that are all actually functioning. So we have all the pieces in place to do some really elaborate exercises if we coordinate it and do things together. So those are things that we're working on there. And then obviously the business and economic opportunities. We've looked at other states, and the state of Atlanta, working with Augusta University, has created what they're calling a cyber innovation center that has kind of kicked off and sparked a major level of startup and ecosystems around cyber research and development. So there's options on that we're looking at. And then there's also an opportunity to, similar to what we're doing with the path makers at Purdue, there's an opportunity as these opportunities and these systems and processes become matured from this council, we can get our local talent and our local students involved in those things to help create a pipeline to address what everyone's saying is going to be a massive shortage in just cyber professionals in the future. So this is what it looks like. This graphic here represents about 250 volunteers. That's why I say I'm very, very proud and impressed on what we've been able to do when you talk about a volunteer effort. And it's spread out. You can see the major sectors at the top there that we focused on, and obviously elections is the talk of everything now. So that was an add-in just this year with all the scrutiny that's been on that lately. And then you'll see these things that run horizontal here span each one of those things and kind of tap into that as we're making our deliverables. And so we've up so far since we've started. I guess we kicked off in November, and right now through current June now, we have about 70 deliverables from either those major sectors or those horizontal working groups that they have put together. And just an example of some of the deliverables we're making, I just wanted to share a few of the committees I'm on. I'm actually on 3. I'm on one that's identifying PII, and you're probably wondering why. We all know what PII is. Why do we need a working group on that? Well, this one's a little different because of the digital age now, and with data science and data analytics, it's really easy to take bits and pieces of data that people are putting in different spots, and if you're savvy enough, you may be able to put those together and get a really close indicator on what an entity might be or who that person might be. And so we're looking really closely at what data can these sectors share together, and being careful to not expose unintentionally expose something that we don't want to do. And so this digital age has really changed that traditional definition of PII that was in place decades ago. And so the committee I'm on, this is chaired by our state chief privacy officer and Valita Fredlin, who's the chief privacy officer for IHI, and then they're working with those groups. So the way that horizontal piece works is Valita and Ted then create their documents, but they take input from all of the actual sectors up there to make sure they're not missing anything, so that their document can be as comprehensive as possible. And so that's another reason why those are set up like that. The other committee I'm on is cyber sharing. So this committee is taking input from all of those groups, and this is where we get to what concerns do you have about talking to other people in your sector? Are you afraid you're going to lose your competitive advantage if you share anything? Are you afraid, government's going to get involved, or the regulatory commissions? And let's talk through those and see how we can mitigate those as best as possible. And so the output from this committee is going to be a plan of how we can get this done, and then we'll pick a few target sectors to do some pilots on and make sure it's going to work, and then we'll continue to refine it from there. And then the third committee I'm on is the what I call is the fun one, and I chair this one myself along with the Major General Carr from the National Guard, and this is that pre-through-post incident. So this is that how do we plan initially for a statewide response? How can we do testing in tabletop from a statewide response? And then how can we be prepared and know our roles and what we need to do if and when we do have to respond to something that's not a test scenario. And so this one I call fun just because it's talking about all of our capabilities that we have. The National Guard is doing some really they've kind of really taken it up a notch in terms of cyber. I know Indiana's fortunate. I wish I had the map that they showed me. I was at the Cyber Shield event down at Camp Atterbury a couple weeks ago, and we're one of maybe only 20 states that actually was able to send a team out to Virginia to actually learn kind of this next wave of, I'll call it, red team cyber exercise type stuff. And so they're coming back with a really deep knowledge of the latest threats and tools that can be used to help protect, but also to help, kind of attack, honestly. So that's kind of exciting that our state's one of those states, and our National Guard is one of the National Guards that's going to have that capability built in. So figuring out where we can best use these assets we have is really cool. And so we'll come up with a plan that we can give to the governor, because obviously in order for the National Guard to get involved on anything, and in order for me to touch anything that's not down at the executive branch, it'll have to come from the governor. And so this plan will look something like, I envision what I've seen so far, a escalation level of the type of event, from maybe it was just a small bank in a rural county that was attacked. Maybe what do we do? Just let law enforcement handle it? Do we need to do anything? And that would go all the way up to, what I would call a level 5, to where, what happens if Citizens Water is thinking that something's been tampered with on their systems? What do we do from that standpoint? Does that when the National Guard comes in, and FBI and all those folks? So it's walking through those scenarios. What do we activate? When to activate? And giving the governor good guidance on that. Then there's also a training piece. So we've also looked at how do we get more folks trained. So today, hopefully you haven't had to experience any of this, but there's been a couple ransomware outbreaks in the state at some hospitals. I think one of our Red Cross centers had one. So today when you do that, you call, my advice, and people always ask, what do you do when you sense something? Well, you call the law enforcement. And today, under the state police, we have two very knowledgeable, experienced cyber, what I'll call them, cyber, policemen, I guess, that can help out with that. There's one in the north and one in the south. So it's not a lot of capability. MSISAC has some resources, DHS has some resources, but they are not readily available. And you kind of get put on a waiting list if you have to do that, whereas state police can respond pretty quickly and at least help you get in a handle on the situation and what needs to be done. So the discussion on this training now is how can we get more of those folks? We've looked at a model that the state of Michigan has that they've actually used their Michigan InfraGuard to vet and approve a set of just regular public folks to help in this capacity. It's sort of like a cybersecurity firemen or firefighters. They go through background checks and they go through InfraGuard and they go through training, and then they're available to help respond to various things that occur when there's not state police or the equivalent to help. So we're looking at, is this something we need to do? I think one of the proposals right now from state police is just identifying other law enforcements, whether it's sheriff offices or other local county police units, and making sure they have someone in their shop that's trained and can respond. And then that's kind of a win-win for the state overall. So those are some of the things we're working on to produce and make recommendations on out of this committee. So our last meeting was April 27th for this. We meet down in the government center, and from a deliverable, we gave an initial presentation for the sharing maturity model. We have a scorecard, and so another big piece of this council is we want to make sure it's effective. The folks are doing a lot of work, they're donating a lot of time, and we want to make sure that we are making progress. And so we've created a draft scorecard to send out to all of the folks that we're going after in those sectors to kind of measure themselves now. After we do the recommendations and we implement some tools and resources, then we want to do another measurement at another key checkpoint and make sure we've actually made some progress. If we're not making any progress, there's no reason to, there's no reason to A, continue using 250 people's time, or B, maybe we need to restructure the way we're doing some of these things. So that's what we're going to use to keep us on track. And then that emergency response team proposal was the training of the law enforcement. And so this council has a kind of a hard stop for this year on what we need to do, and it's a lot of work is going to be done over the next couple of months. But the plan is to put those 70 deliverables we have now, along with the other plans and things I discussed here, into a large proposal for the governor that we want to deliver on in September. And with that, then he'll obviously take back to his policy team. We probably won't be able to do much in terms of this legislative session because it's going to be coming very close. It'll be starting just a few months after that. But definitely working towards that next session, seeing what things we need to do and the things that the different sectors have identified as roadblocks or issues or things we can change or do to help them. And it could also mean funding, but all those will be presented to him, and then his team will then decide what's high on the radar for them to kind of go after and tackle, and what are they going to help with, and then that'll direct our charge for the council going into the future years. And then we're going to capstone everything after that deliverable on October 23rd, in which we're going to have our first CyberTech Midwest Cyber Conference, which any of you are invited to. This is, if you haven't heard the name CyberTech, we have been working on this for probably the last 3 years. I've had the privilege of being able to travel with our Economic Development Corp over to Israel 2 out of the last 3 years to attend the CyberTech Israel Conference, which is one of the largest worldwide cyber conferences. And you have folks from, their particular conference has folks from federal DHS, FBI, NSA, all those folks to come and just share what's going on and what can we do to all work better together. So it's really an effort on, it's really geared, the state of Israel does it on how can we make Israel better secure. And so our version, even though it's called Midwest, our version here to start is going to be how can we make Indiana better. So it's going to be a lot of sharing from Fed level, from state level, and a lot of local level on how we can work better together, share some best practices, and talk about some things. So very excited about that. I think we'll be able to keep it, a 3-year commitment on this. So it'll be this year and the next 2 years to see how we can grow this and just get some awareness around how we can work together in this area better. So with that, I did a lot of talking, sorry about that. But wanted to make sure you knew we were taking this thing seriously, and we are trying to do quite a bit of stuff. It's a big, it's a big Titanic to move and keep an eye on, but there is definitely attention, and proper diligence all the way up to the governor's office in this area. And so hopefully some of this showed, our seriousness to this topic. So with that, did I leave anything uncovered that you might have a question about?
Do you have a sense of where Indiana stands in these broad areas compared to other states?
So,
It seems pretty complicated.
it's, yeah, it is. And it's, you get back to the whole consolidation thing where other states are kind of set up different too, and getting a good apples to apples comparison. National Governors Association is trying to help with that. So they talk with all states and all governors if the state opts into the NGA program, which not all states do, but they do some just really brief surveys on, hey, do you have a coordinated group of folks that are talking about this issue? Do you have these certain things? It's really broad though. It's like a 1 through 3 survey, and they only send you back the aggregate. And so the last one, it had Indiana maybe in the top quarter based to the other states on that aggregate, but they don't really show you who the others were. So I would say just based off of the coordination we have, at least, we at least have the right people talking about it and focusing on the things, which is, that's an accomplishment in itself for government.
I have a question. Aside from the website that you had up that's public-facing information and things like
Mhm.
that, what can the folks here in the room do to leverage the work that you guys have already done, tap into that, or even about what you guys are doing, coming forward with the post-incident
Mm-hmm.
type of things? I think you guys probably want to know about that too. So how can we not reinvent the wheel and kind of tap into what you guys are doing from a higher ed perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. I say definitely keep an eye on the website, because the plan is to, even those, as we develop procedures and policies and deliverables, the plan is to post them up there as well, especially for the council. And then obviously all the things coming from the ISAC. So that'll be a good resource to keep an eye on. But I will also, maybe Mary Ann or Alice, I'll make sure that you have my email address as well as Shatrice Mosley's email address. Shatrice would probably be the better contact on that, because she'll talk about, what the future is going to be, and she'll talk about what this thing's going to look like for the next couple years too. And I think I think we'll be relooking at the members of the committee right now. Some folks may be burnt out, so there'll be a chance to kind of shift some of that. And based off of those recommendations, there'll be different deliverables and objectives for next year than what we have here, which we could probably use some help on if folks are interested. So those 2 avenues would be the best to kind of keep a tab on where things are going and how you can help or take advantage of it.
Any other questions for Dewand?
Well, that was good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We really
thanks.
appreciate
Yeah.
you being here
Yeah,
with
no
us
problem.
this morning.
Yeah.